Hello everyone, I will talk about my chosen scholar in this video essay. And for the scholar video essay, my definition of the digital is about the idea of unlocking the growth through the lens of economic perspective. And this idea should be narrowed down in two ways in order for us to better understand what is this unlocking the growth is all about. The first element is the sophisticated technology of the digital has widened the entrance and lowered the threshold for people to have easier and simpler access to gather information of what they needed. And the second element is to reconsider how we can utilize the digital as a new capability to improve how people are served. At the perspective of running a business, for example, the digital is an effective and efficient medium to support implementing the dynamic where processes are based on inputs from demand and fostering outputs from supply. This means the business owner can directly know from the digital information where are demands and how to satisfy demands. So these two elements together makes up the definition of digital of how it actually unlocks the growth. In my scholar of choosing, Banerjee is a professor of MIT, focuses on development economics, and he is an Indian-born American economist, and his parents are also economics professor in India, with experiences of born and grew up in India, where income and wealth inequality are severe. For example, even in 2017 in India, top 10% of people control 65% of overall wealth. And Banerjee realized that this problem of poverty is not only causing people to have a lower standard of living, but also creating a poverty trap that people is hardly getting out of. And he studied the worldwide poverty issues since 2003, that he co-founded the Poverty Action Lab, MIT. And later on, he had been nominated for Nobel Prize of Economics in 2019 for his and his team's experimental approach to alleviating global poverty. In most of Banerjee's career, he focuses on global poverty issues and dedicates to find out the solutions to it. But before we are moving on to talk about how his works might connect to the digital, I would like to take a step before this and ask you guys a question. You can pause this for 10 seconds to think. The question is why we should care about global poverty issues besides from humanity and ethical perspectives. I'm listing 3 reasons of why we should care about poverty. First, poverty breeds desperation, and desperation leads to crime. 2. Poverty doesn't deny the lives of people who could have grown to their full potential. And 3. We should eliminate the biases that some go further to blame the poor for their problems, such as shiftless, lazy, and unintelligent. So these 3 reasons should be considered as a true hypothesis that the poverty issues can be actually solved. Speaking of how Banerjee's work relate to the digital, I like to interpret the relationships by 2 ways: before the experiment and after the experiment. So before Banerjee's experimental result coming close to help alleviate the global poverty, he had to set up a nearly perfect experiment that can be able to apply to the poverty situation, as one of his published paper mentions. Well, there are several possible ways to interpret the data. The more fruitful approaches are the ones which take the inherent nonlinearities presenting the data seriously. I'm not trying to preach something about linearity versus nonlinearity, but reflecting back to our definition of the digital. And we can see that the digital can facilitate experiment by gather the source of information that are needed. In such a way, the digital becomes a helpful tool to fight the global poverty at the very beginning. Later on, the digital can be helpful after the experiment, and it plays a role of connecting supply and demand. For example, in Banerjee's work, a book called Poor Economics, he mentions that access to microfinance, which is a type of loan to poor people, it's important because it gives the poor a way to map out the future and in a way that was not possible for them before. Once again, this connects back to our definition of the digital, that it unlocks the growth. And this time it's unlocking the growth to the poor. In a more specific and clarity example, if a poor entrepreneur lives in a developing country where don't have a lot of investors, then this poor entrepreneur could hardly success, even though this entrepreneur has a very great inventions. But with the help of the digital, the poor entrepreneur can send his or her request through the digital online and asking for a rich and wealthy group from all over the world to have a look on his or her inventions. So, in general, the digital plays a role when Banerjee is setting up in his experiment, and the digital also plays a role after his experiment is done. And this gives a strong, collectively exhaustive kind of connection between Banerjee's dedication to alleviate poverty and the digital implementation. Moving to the quotes, I've chosen three quotes that reinforce on how Banerjee's dedication relates to our discussion of the digital. The first quote is here. For example, this means that the poor, they are unsure about the benefits of immunized children, or they might think there is low value in what is learned during the first few years of education. If we can implement the digital in poor areas, then there will be a magnificent benefits for changing the poor's original misleading perspectives. For example, the WHO can create an online learning session and make this to be a requirement of learning in school, or even sending out free bags of noodles and rices if they complete this session. In addition, Banerjee not only wants to mitigate the poverty issues in a short run, but also to eradicate them totally. This might need a long-term plan that may be able to assist up the poverty lifting processes. And this long-term plan will also has to do with the digital implementation. And this leads us to the second quote here. For example, children give up on school when their teachers signal to them that they are not smart enough. And nurses stop coming to work because nobody expects them to be there. Everyone needs dignity, so does the poor. So the digital is a medium that promotes ideology to help the poor digest discrimination, and while not allowing this discrimination affect their self-esteem. For example, the digital is open sources for the poor to broaden their views and opening their mindsets. And finally, to our last quote here. The discipline of economics is a science primarily concerned with the allocation of scarce resources. However, the investigation of the economics would be better in interdisciplinary perspective in terms of exploring causes and consequences of jobless, pollution, and healthcare. All of these issues have psychological, moral, and political dimensions. An economics framework alone may not be sufficient. Therefore, this also brings up the digital as a discipline, because as we have discussed earlier, that the digital is an efficient approach to access information. And we can make an analogy here to say that the digital is similar to a knot that ties different areas of studies into a rope for economics to pull. An action of pulling could make the world economically better. However, there are challenges to Banerjee's work. I will be talking about one that seems critical to me. It's not everyone in this world having the same electricity access. Some countries have easier access to the electricity because the countries have better power grid system, but some countries' electricity are very unstable. Also, as we're moving towards renewable energy, powerful countries seem to agree replacing the current fossil fuel to renewables, and this will further deteriorate the poorer countries and will put them in a worse condition. As we all know, the digital needs electricity to power up, so this will hinder Banerjee's work to long-term alleviating the poverty worldwide. Thank you guys for watching, and please comment me down below, and I will have my citation at the end.